A week from Friday is going to be the last day we'll accept renewals for next fiscal year before we go to Club Express.
Got it.
At least I hope that's true.
It's funny, just about everything we do now, we end up saying Club Express, you know, when we get Club Express, this changes, that changes. It's just a minute after. I think I'll give everybody like about 5 minutes and see.
Hi, Lucille.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Lucille. Long time no see. Did you have a good summer?
Yes.
Great.
How about you?
Yes, yeah, busy. Yeah. The highlight was going to the national conference in Denver. That was really fun, and I learned a lot. It looks like we're getting some people in just under the deadline. Give it 2 more minutes, okay? The more I dig into this topic, the more afraid I become. This is scary stuff.
It can be scary. We're going to explain why it's
Yeah,
not.
okay.
We're going to explain why it's not.
I'm counting on you, Mitchell. Yeah, right. Okay, we'll give it another minute for latecomers, and then we'll go ahead and launch. Okay, it's 6:35, so if it's okay, we'll just get started. I want to welcome everybody to LWVCM's first League Talk for the year. As in previous years, we will be using the Zoom platform. The event this evening features a panel update on the Moore versus Harper case, scheduled for review by SCOTUS this fall, with a possible decision rendered before July of 23. I was going to introduce special guests this evening, but I think everybody knows each other. We've got a couple of board members here, three, Margaret House Soper, Pam Liebman, and Sarah Basinger, and Kate Stadelman. So welcome, board members. I'm so glad you're here. I don't think there are any candidates in the office, but the league has a strict nonpartisan policy of never supporting a political candidate or party. So if you are a candidate for election, it's fine to tell us. However, campaigning is frowned upon in a big way. So, all right, let's get to our program. The U.S. Supreme Court will decide whether the North Carolina Supreme Court can strike down its legislative gerrymandered map for being in violation of the state constitution. The case was brought by two majority party legislators contesting the North Carolina Supreme Court's decision to reject the map as egregious and intentional partisan gerrymander. And they are asking SCOTUS to reinstate the map. The legislative briefs are primarily based on a misinterpretation of an elections clause in the Constitution known as the independent state legislative theory. It delegates power to regulate federal elections to the states while granting Congress authority to make or alter the laws. Among the examples of what is at stake is the loss of voters' rights, having the extreme North Carolina partisan gerrymander stand, and having our state constitution rendered meaningless. It is said this case will impact laws throughout the country in a very negative way. Our panelists this evening are Mitchell Brown. Mitchell is counsel to the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. He graduated from NYU School of Law and clerked for judges on the district and federal courts. His mission is to speak for the voiceless, defend the vulnerable, and empower the powerless. Next, we have Rotrina Campbell. Rotrina is a highly skilled civic engagement organizer with Common Cause, North Carolina. She's a graduate from Johnson C. Smith, and she has her MA in Business Administration from the University of Phoenix. Rotrina holds workshops on the redistricting process and works to bring a voice to citizens in North Carolina. And finally, Harry Taylor, one of our own. He is a league member and a community activist for fair maps and the fight against gerrymandering, and his puppet, Jerry Mander. Harry is a graduate of Colgate University and a veteran of the Air Force. He retired from a successful real estate brokerage in Charlotte, and he authored, if any of you remember, an excellent article on our topic for tonight in last month's Voter. I hope you read it. It's something about what was it here, an 8-ton gorilla in the room?
Yeah, something I can't remember, but yeah, this is
Right.
this is the 850-pound gorilla.
Yeah. Well, whatever, that's about true. So I want to welcome you all. We're so delighted that you took the time to come and be with us this evening. The format is kind of loosey-goosey, but members of the audience are encouraged to list their questions in the chat box. But unless you're called to speak or you raise your hand, please stay on mute. Panelists, we're going to recognize panelists. They're going to give a statement or whatever they wish to do, and then eventually we'll go to a Q&A. So ladies first, we'll start with Rotrina.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. That was one of the best I think I've ever had. So I appreciate that. Yes. So today we're going to talk some about Moore v. Harper case, which is a part of our Map Our Future, People Over Politics, which is what it should be. And if it's okay, I was going to share some of my slides. If I can share my screen. I think if I may be able to, I don't know if I need to be a co-host maybe, or. If you maybe find me in the chat, and then it should be on the side to say co-host.
I was going to say, yeah, you can click on participants.
Yes.
Click on
Yeah,
participants.
there you go.
Click on participants, and then it should like have a button that says make host or make co-host.
Mhm.
Suzanne, you are on mute.
I'm sorry. Click on what, Mitchell?
So you go to participants. So I click on participants, and a list of the participants should pop up. And then there should be a button that says make co-host.
Got it. Did it.
Yep.
All righty. Okay, I should be good.
There we go.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Mitchell. Save the day. Thank you.
Okay, everybody should be able to see my screen.
Yep, we see it.
Okay, you see it? Okay, good. All right. Well, what I had already mentioned, we'll be talking about Morvie Harper, which is a part of our Map Our Future tour. And I just want to say thank y'all for being here and allowing us to be here tonight. I'm just going to skip through a few of these slides. What I do want to say, we are here. We've been doing these tours around North Carolina, basically to educate North Carolinians about the implications of Morvie Harper, which Suzanne has mentioned. I think she did a great overview. I was about to say, what am I here for? Because she did really well. The latest North Carolina redistricting case to head to our U.S. Supreme Court. So I'm going to talk about this since June 30th, when the Supreme Court granted review of the North Carolina redistricting case, Morvie Harper, organizational plaintiff, Common Cause, which is I'm part of, and our litigation partner, Southern Coalition of Social Justice, which we have Mitchell Brown. I'm so happy that he's on here today. Began the important work of planning an unprecedented campaign to tell our story about our state's fight for responsive maps and voting access, and the impacts of what more could have on our future elections in North Carolina and across the nation. So we're here definitely, we're working to educate up to 100,000 folks and more, if possible, about the implications of more, and connect the dots between more and the issues of our community and what we all care about the most. And I just want to know, have any of you heard the latest, just our poll about this case, about our Morvie Harper case? You can put it in the chat. I'm just curious to know if anyone knows, have heard about this case prior to. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to get into it. All righty. So just want to talk a little bit before we dive all the way into this. Is basically not that long ago in 2019, North Carolina Supreme Court case, the Rucho v. Common Cause. The majority of justices said that federal courts couldn't review partisan gerrymandering, but that the state courts could, based on provisions in the state constitution. Many states have constitutions protecting the right to vote. Of course, those constitutional protections would be irrelevant if state courts had no power to review the actions of state legislatures that violated that right to vote. So state courts, I just want to say, like the ones in North Carolina, did review on our state legislature's partisan gerrymanders for the constitutionality. And in February of 2022, the North Carolina Supreme Court struck down the North Carolina General Assembly's congressional and state legislative maps as partisan gerrymanders that violated the state constitution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these maps and what they look like prior to. So here is the original. I'm sorry, that's my daughter. Ask your sister. She'll help you. So I'm going to talk about, this is the original congressional plan that was struck down. I just want to say North Carolina is a purple state. It is considered a purple state, but somehow in a purple state, we ended up getting a map that would most likely be 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats. This was the original map that was struck down. And also the North Carolina's largest counties, which was Mecklenburg, Wake, and Guilford, was split. So the court found, and basically these maps is pretty much what the court was saying caused ripple effects throughout the map. And I do want to say that Mecklenburg and Wake, it has to be split because it's just too large, but they do not have to split 3 ways. So basically the court found that the cracking and packing of Democratic voters in Guilford, Mecklenburg, and Wake counties, like I previously said, definitely had ripple effects throughout the map. So basically, the North Carolina Supreme Court ruling, Harper v. Hall, was claimed unconstitutional beyond a reasonable doubt. The General Assembly violates the North Carolina Constitution when it deprives a voter of his or her right to substantially equal voting power on the basis of a party affiliation. The trial court specifically found that the General Assembly diminished and diluted the voting power of voters affiliated with one party on the basis of affiliation. And that's, I know, the first time ever that they had basically said that found the maps that were gerrymandered to be heavily partisan gerrymandering, and that it was unconstitutional. So basically, they said no. The North Carolina Supreme Court Justice said it's not going to work. They had someone, a special master, who ended up creating the new map, which was approved by the courts, which is what you see here, which is now most likely would be an outcome of 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats, which is more likely showing the purple state that we are. And in the new congressional map, Wake and Mecklenburg counties are only split once, and Guilford County is kept whole, as you can see in this map. That's from the new map by the special masters. I also want to point out the plan that was struck down in terms of proportionality is at an 11, and we're talking about out of 100, it received an 11. That's that score. From the congressional map by the special masters that was approved by the court, received a proportionality of a 94 out of 100. So I just want to, give an idea of the difference. Although they're not perfect, we have better and fair congressional maps. This is also showing the partisan bias, with the first map being more so leaning 14.7% Republican from that original plan. And then you have from the state approved plan, the state court approved plan, you have 0.9% leaning Republican, meaning that center making it more balanced than what it was before. So wanted to just give an example of what that looked like. And of course, state legislature leaders they were unhappy about this gerrymander, about this congressional maps, and decided to appeal the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court under the independent state legislative theory, the ISLT. Basically, ISLT would give state legislatures unrestricted authority to set rules. Oh, I'm sorry. To set rules for federal elections. And unlike today, your governor nor state courts would no longer have a say in those election rules. I do want to point out, even in redistricting, our governor already cannot veto the map. So we take this. I just want y'all to understand how important the North Carolina Supreme State Court is, because that's where we, take this when things are unfair. So, because right now, even in this state at the moment, the governor cannot veto those redistricting maps. So I just want to point that out. Basically, this fringe legal premise has been universally criticized, even by conservatives, like Judge Luting. In the quote you see here, as he says, for potentially creating two different election structures, because you're talking about this is for the congressional elections, one for federal elections and one for state and local, basically would create chaos and barriers on our voting systems. It would be the gravest threat to American democracy today. So let's see, what does this mean? Basically, in plain language, it means ISLT would let politicians manipulate the outcome of our elections. ISLT would let politicians thwart and undermine your vote. ISLT would remove all checks and balances at the state level, handling unchecked power to set federal election rules to the state legislature. A few more harms, but best believe me, we're going to get to some good. We're going to get to some good and how we can start this. ISLT would make it even easier for our state politicians to create barriers to voting, draw rigged voting maps, cast doubt on fair election results. So if you think about it, purges of voters from what could happen, voters from voting roll, cuts to early voting, fewer protection against voter intimidation. Those are just some of the things that could happen, what could come out of this. As we say, if you're ever in an elevator, I don't know if you'll be in an elevator having this conversation with anyone, but basically we get down to the bottom line, which is the bottom line. If this abuse of power succeeds when it comes to federal elections, legislatures will be free to manipulate our elections and state courts could not stop them. So this is kind of our like elevator pitch. When you're out and anyone asks you this question, this is the bottom line of where we're at. So I do want to recommend, oh goodness, I do want to say that all 50 state Supreme Court Chief Justices from both sides of the political aisle are urging SCOTUS to reject North Carolina lawmakers' arguments in Moore v. Harper. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was led by Kentucky. So that tells you a lot, because this is nationwide, because no side wants this, yes, here, because we are nonpartisan, but all the way across the board, because you do have in North Carolina, not all are Republican ran state legislatures, right? So no one wants this all the way across the board. And when Kentucky can get involved, you already know it's something. So basically, I already mentioned that. It's not about Democrat or Republican. It's just wrong, and this case goes too far. So I'm gonna go through this. And basically what I want to say, many of you are definitely no strangers to the attack on our democracy. It has been happening for years, but what we do know is every time that we fight together, every time that we work together, every time that we come together to achieve something, we win. And that's the basis of what this is about, is what this people over politics is and what we're working to do. That's why we're having these conversations. That's why we're letting people know. That's why we're connecting this to the ballot, because it's all about if this succeeds, how do you want your state legislature to be? Who do you want on your North Carolina State Supreme, as your North Carolina State Supreme Court justices? So it's just really putting it down to the ballot and getting out there and making sure this is people over politics and not the other way around. As you can see, pretty much just showing that anytime they something like this happens, we all work together and we all fight back as one voice. We get people out. Even during I was doing redistricting organizing prior to, and literally in one of the sessions, I was listening to, I can't remember if it was the House or the Senate, but one of the legislators said, "Oh man, 10 years ago, we didn't have this many people, commenting, being involved." So that right there tells you something. What we're doing is telling you something, that we're letting our voice be heard and we're getting out there. So I just want to, I've talked about this before. Basically, is what I said. 89% oppose partisan gerrymandering. 89% of North Carolinians oppose partisan gerrymandering. So in North Carolina, we know more means more for a few and less for the rest. Basically, as I mentioned, more is the accumulation of 10-year effort by North Carolina lawmakers to legitimize, I can't talk tonight, the courts and erode the power of other branches of government. Through this case, some politicians are trying to make it even easier for state legislatures to suppress the vote, draw gerrymander election districts, and cast doubt on our elections results. So we fighting back and we putting people over politics. This is a little bit more of what we're planning to do. I'm so sorry. So basically, plaintiff, us, Common Cause, and Litigation SCSJ are helping to lead a year-long campaign with our coalition partners in North Carolina across the nation to fight back. I mean, I think even Sailor's going to Alabama this week to talk about this. So that's how important, that's how much we're trying to get this word out, and that this is something that is nationwide. In North Carolina, the current plan is broken into 4 phases that we have here from now until next summer, when we're likely to receive this ruling in the case. So we're rolling all the way to next summer, and even after that. August through October, we'll educate the public on more and how to talk about it, which is what we're doing now, mobilizing to speak. Speak to every voter who will listen. November to December, we'll host North Carolina-based and national events and rallies surrounding the December 2022 oral arguments to reveal what we believe to be true. That when people learn about more, that they don't like it. I mean, that's just what I've learned from doing this. They don't like it, as is the case with any ultimate power grab. January through May, so y'all gonna roll with us for a while. As lawmakers return in January 2023 with their own agenda, including redrawing congressional maps, we'll be ready, fighting back against any political attacks on our democracy and fighting yet again for responsive maps. And then we have our summer 2023 and beyond. We'll be doing it all to build a movement that is ready for whatever comes. So after all of that, where do we start?
Trina, I hope you'll include the league in some of your activities, your rallies and things like that, because we want to help.
Oh yes, definitely. The league has been a great support of ours and working together and partnering together. So definitely. Basically, I'm sorry, Suzanne.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no. So basically,
thank you for your presentation, and I think we need to move on to Mitchell.
Oh yes. Well, let me just go slide to the end right here, because we do have, I'll put it in the chat. We do have the MORE pledge. We can get all the contact information. Make sure you take that MORE pledge. You will get the slides, and we do also have more resources, which I will provide in the chat as well. So I'll make sure you all get this, and you will get the slides as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll get back to you with the Q&A in a little while.
Okay.
Mitchell,
Yep.
I'd like to recognize you now to give your spiel.
Yep. And so I just have a couple of points. I mean, the presentation that Roshina gave really explains what SCSJ is doing, what Common Cause is doing around this issue nationwide. So we're having events across North Carolina, but we're also having events in Florida and Ohio, Alabama, other states, because this is bigger than North Carolina. And so just to name that, what happens with this case affects Florida and Florida's Fair District Amendment, for example, that in their state constitution, they have an amendment that says that you can't draw maps for a specific partisan lean. That will go away. Take it to other states like Ohio, and what they have a redistricting committee that helps draw their maps. Is that even, would that be constitutional under this independent state legislature theory? So it's bigger than just North Carolina. But taking it specific to North Carolina, a couple of things I just want to point out, and we're trying to, talk about in the presentation, is that this case is all about who gets to check the legislature. Whether the legislature itself is the only body that can draw maps, or whether or not a state court can hold them accountable for the maps that they draw. And I want to point out that in the partisan gerrymandering context in Rucho v. Common Cause in 2019, the United States Supreme Court said that federal courts cannot rule on partisan gerrymandering because it's what's known as non-justiciable, which means that the federal courts can't rule on it. It's not something that they feel is under their jurisdiction. So they left it to state courts. If the Supreme Court agrees with the North Carolina legislature that only the legislature can draw maps and state courts cannot check the legislature, then that leaves really no recourse, because we can go to federal court, but we can't even go to federal court because on the partisan gerrymandering side, the courts are not going to address it. They're going to automatically dismiss that case from federal court as non-justiciable and as outside of the subject matter jurisdiction of the court. So that's what's at stake here. Who's able to hold the legislature accountable? The second thing is this case was focused on partisan gerrymandering, but underneath there is a lot of racial justice issues and who gets to speak and who gets to represent the folks in North Carolina, voters in North Carolina. And this goes beyond redistricting. Ratrina talked about it a little bit with the chaos that could come from having two separate systems of elections, one for state elections and one for federal elections. But this goes beyond just redistricting. This goes to voter ID laws, for example. Can a state court hold the legislature accountable for voter ID, for passing voter ID laws that are unconstitutional under the state constitution? Under this theory, the answer would be no, because that deals with federal elections, and so you could have voter ID for state elections, but no voter ID for state elections, but voter ID for federal elections. So when a voter comes to the polling place, they're going to be confused about whether or not they need ID or not. So that's another incident that could come from the court agreeing with the North Carolina legislature on the independent state legislature theory. And there's a couple more points is that we are going to win this case. We're very confident we're going to win this case. I know it's a lot of doom and gloom, and I know a lot of heaviness around this case, but we believe we're going to win. One, because as Ratrina talked about, there was a conference of chief justices from all 50 states that said, don't take away our power as a state court. Tied with that is this theory has never really been taught, has very rarely been talked about in over 200 some odd years that this country has been in existence. Like nobody's really talked about this. And third, the elections clause argument that Congress gave specific power to the legislature to draw maps and make rules around federal elections. Congress never spoke about that state courts could not, hold the legislature accountable, and state courts have been holding the legislature accountable for hundreds of years. So this theory is, in my opinion, in the opinion, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues at SSJ, but in my opinion, a last-ditch effort to take away power from the people. One of the slides that is in Ratrina's slide deck talks about how this has been a consistent effort over the last 10 to 12 years in particular. Well, in redistricting over the last 30 years, but specifically in the last 10 to 12 years, there's been a concerted effort to chip away at people's voting rights in North Carolina, specifically on racial grounds. And consistently, courts have stood up, whether it be a federal court or state courts have specifically stood in the way of legislature and helped voters in the state of North Carolina and protected voters under the law so that they can cast their ballots and so that their vote counts as much as their neighbor's vote does. And so removing courts from the system of checks and balances is going to be detrimental to protecting voting rights. And, I said it's a last-ditch effort by the legislature to take away power from the courts and to harm voters. that they've tried and have failed time and time again, and we have to fight back. And so that's why we win. And I'll save the rest of my comments for the Q&A portion so we can go to Harry.
Hey, Mitchell, I wanted to ask a follow-through question because of something you brought up. A ruling in favor of more would give politicians complete control of who votes for them and how.
Yes.
Yet the people have never wavered in their belief that this should not be. Do you worry that this polarized, some say activist court will rule against the will of the majority of Americans? I know you said that you're not worried.
I'm not worried.
Why are you not worried? Because several of the justices have said that they're looking on this with favor.
Yeah. So two particular thoughts, and I'll try to put them in layman's terms and not legal terms. I'll try to make speak in layman's terms. The first reason is that the court itself, so the United States Supreme Court itself, understands checks and balances. They understand that they have the ability to check the executive branch and to check and check Congress on the federal level. So they understand the position of power that they hold in the system checks and balances. And so they understand that state courts and state Supreme Courts in particular hold that same authority and hold that same power in the system of checks and balances. So it's the first reason why I'm not really worried, because they understand the position of state Supreme Courts. Second is, again, reading the text of the elections clause. So Suzanne, you mentioned the elections clause in the opening of your comments. Reading the text of the elections clause, Congress gave, authority to the state legislature to make rules around the time, place, and manner of federal elections within their state. Like, that is what the elections clause is about. The elections clause does not say that state courts cannot be involved. The elections clause does not say that the legislature is the sole, the sole body that can make unconstitutional rules. Like the elections clause, in the founding fathers, as we call them, right or wrong, contemplate, a system of checks and balances. That's why they set up our government the way they did. And so I think the United States Supreme Court is going to understand this system of checks and balances, and understand, and even those justices who are textualists, they will read the text of the elections clause and say, hey, state courts are not prohibited from stepping into the fray if a law that's passed by a state legislature is unconstitutional under either the federal law or under state law. Like, that's the purpose of the state courts. Because federal courts do not have jurisdiction over the interpretation of state law. Like that's not the way the court works. And tied with that, I think they have to understand, and we're going to make the argument that this could cause chaos in our electoral system. When you have one set of rules for state elections and another set of rules for federal elections, that's going to cause an issue around voter confusion, around what laws govern, certain elections, and it's going to throw our electoral system into chaos. So I think they understand that. And so that's why I have hope.
Well, you have made me feel much better, because this is really a, kind of a nightmare thing.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back again on the Q&A, but I'd like to recognize Harry Taylor at this time. So I'm sure Harry has some pearls of wisdom to impart. Harry?
No, Mitchell's not worried, and Allison Riggs, who is the co-director of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, has told us not to be worried, that she understands what the argument was or is, and Allison was the one that presented the Common Cause Rubcho case in 2019. So he heard directly from the justices their reaction that it wasn't a case that they couldn't they couldn't do something about partisan gerrymanders in the state. They didn't want to. They just decided they didn't want to. And so I think Allison is counting on them to come back to or go back there in whenever the case is. And I think it's not on the docket yet, but whenever it is, she's counting on being able to throw that back in their face. But Harry's worried, and Harry doesn't sleep very good at night over this thing. I want to just briefly tell you, most of you know that I ran for U.S. Congress in 2008 in what was the old District 9, which has not been held by a Democrat since John F. Kennedy was in the White House. That's a long, long, long time to be in control of a district. And I knew what gerrymandering was when I was in 7th grade, but I'd never run for office before, and I'd never seen what a campaign looks like from the inside when the whole system's rigged against you winning. I did really well. I won the early vote, but when election day came around, all the opposition came and I lost that vote. In January of 2009, 2 months later, I began speaking about gerrymandering, what it does to our democracy, how it undermines it. And I've been doing it ever since. And I'm in my 13th year doing that. So I've watched what's happened since when I first decided I was going to talk about it. I thought I was going to be talking to the Democratic legislature, but it wasn't that way when the Republicans took control of the legislature in 2010. And it has been a bloody, bloody, bloody decade. And we're, I think, fear looking at more of the same. I'm going to jump around a little bit. In February, I did a panel. I hosted Michael Bitzer, the political science and political science teacher at Catawba College. Michael had just come out with a new book, and it's called Redistricting and Gerrymandering in North Carolina. And North Carolina has more litigation than any other state in the country. And it's like we're at ground zero for litigation against gerrymandering and maps. And it is a confusing issue. It's confusing to go back and understand what all these happen, all these cases, and what happened in one case that turns to be a stepping stone, or the next case kind of stands on what that precedent was. And it's really confusing stuff. And we just got over the Rucho versus Common Cause versus Rucho case, which both Mitch and Rotrina talked about, and now here we are with another one, and the other ones that went to the Supreme Court after the gerrymandering. So it's like one after another. This one is really, really dangerous, and essentially it would take away the opportunity. It would destroy democracy across the country, period, and we'd never, ever, ever get back. One of the huge risks that I see this time around is the nature of the people who sit on the Supreme Court now. This is a rogue, absolutely partisan arm of the Republican Party. This is no longer a blind justice organization of 9 people. This is it's a sham court, and I hate to say it that way, but that's what it's become. And that's who Allison and Mitch and whoever else goes up to Washington to present this have to deal with. A couple other things too. If you saw read the Observer Sunday, there was 3 really good pieces in there. Right in the front page of the Observer was Kevin Sayers cartoons, A Democracy in Danger. Following that was a article, really, really good article called Death Knell of Democracy by what's her name? Paige Maston. Paige is a young woman, a great new member of the editorial board of the Observer, and gives a really good encapsulation of what all this is about and what the risks are and how the Republican majority in Raleigh is facing us. The other 2 pieces were in North Carolina, national fever plays out in the fight over representation. The third part of it was right-wing extremism is everywhere, including North Carolina. And they're all about this and all about the Moore versus Harper case. One last thing to say right now The Republicans aren't counting on this, just this. They've got a couple other things that they're counting on. One, they believe that they're going to take over they're going to have a veto-proof majority in the legislature come the 9th of November. And it's really, really important that people get out and vote for people that aren't in the Republican Party to make sure that the Republicans at least have the ability to uphold Roy Cooper's veto. Second thing is crucial races at the North Carolina Supreme Court. There are 2 seats that are being being fought over this fall. They're both Democrat seats. One is Sam Ervin's seat. He is an incumbent Democrat. The other is Justice Robin Hudson's seat. She is stepping down because she's going to be too old to serve shortly after the year starts. So Lucy Inman is running for that seat as a Democrat. If either one of those 2 people loses, the Supreme Court will be under the control and essentially the ownership of the GOP. And this whole issue about more Harper will be irrelevant, will be moot at that point in time. So it's important to know that at least those 2 things happen. Those to see Democrat, regardless of what party you are in, if we're no party, those 2 justices have to win those seats. And we have to make sure that those people on the Democrat side of the ballot, again, regardless of where you're registered and who you favor, we cannot let that legislature get a veto-proof majority back again. So we're in dangerous place right now in a lot of ways, and I hope you understand the gravity of this. Moore versus Harper is relatively simple. And again, the really easy way to understand what it is look at Paige Maston's column on Sunday, Death Knell of Democracy, and understand where we are and what's happening, what could happen, what could not happen. I'll cede the floor to you, Suzanne, again.
Okay, thank you, Harry. That was great. Mitchell, you had your hand up a little while ago. Did you still want to make a comment?
No. I was just scratching my head.
Oh, okay.
but while I had the floor, I put.
It was that icon for a hand. It was.
I'm sorry. I put the article that Harry is talking about. I put that in the chat. So you all can see that. This is the PDF version, so there's no paywall.
Yeah. Oh, terrific. Great. Harry, I've got a question for you. Can you explain, because this has come up several times, the Rucho and Moore, was it Rucho and Moore case? It was a common cause versus Rucho. That was it.
Common cause versus Rucho, and that was in the lower league. And the league had the same. There was 3, and it could have been the NAACP. And Mitchell, you may be able to answer whatever she's going to ask me about this. But those 3 cases were combined into common cause versus Rucho, and the league was one of those. So that will all combined in the. So that was a league case, and that was. Yeah, that was a really important case. But the good guys didn't win it. What that was asking is to
explain the difference between the 2 cases with that.
Mitchell can do that better than I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So slight caveat to what Harry said. We didn't win at the federal court, but we won at the state court. Hence why state courts matter. So in the Rucho v. Common Cause case, and I think Harry said it very well in his remarks. The federal court, the Supreme Court could have done something about partisan gerrymandering. They chose not to. I like to say they kicked that can down the road, and mainly because they didn't see a standard about a standard that they could use to say that this is too much partisan gerrymandering or this is good. Like they couldn't create a standard, even though many were given. In that Rucho case. So that was in federal Supreme Court, and the court said that the federal courts can't look at partisan gerrymandering. They're not going to take any of those cases, but that the state courts were available if they wanted to create rules around partisan gerrymandering. So we went to state court in 2019. We won, the case there. The court found that, was a part. They didn't really rule on partisan. Trial court ruled on partisan gerrymander, but the North Carolina Supreme Court didn't, because the legislature just redrew the maps in 2019. But fast forward to this case, the common cause common cause case, v. Moore case that was consolidated into Harper v. Moore. At the trial court, the Supreme Court finally got its bite at the apple around partisan gerrymandering and found that it was unconstitutional under the North Carolina state constitution. So the North Carolina Supreme Court, took what the United States Supreme Court said about state courts having the authority to make rules around partisan gerrymandering. That's exactly what they did. And they found it unconstitutional under the North Carolina Constitution. Now the North Carolina legislature is trying to take that back, essentially, and say that, hey, I know what the Supreme Court said about state courts, but the state courts should not have the ability to make these rules around federal elections. Only the legislature can make those rules. So it's kind of ignoring what the United States Supreme Court said, what could happen. And so, yeah, that's what the scary part about it is, that this is literally, if the Supreme Court agrees with the legislature, again, like the legislature can just run amok and do whatever it wants to do. And I hope that answered your question.
I think maybe the easiest way to simplify it is to say that the common cause versus Rucho went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, we're not going to rule that partisan gerrymander is illegal, but the state courts can. And so we're throwing this back to the states and saying that authority exists in the state courts. What Moore versus Harper is trying to say is the state courts don't have the authority that the Supreme Court handed to the states in 2019 or
2019? 2019.
So that's what's happening. And this is Allison Riggs, kind of her kind of guiding light on this thing is they told us to go back to the states and have the states litigate these things. And now what Harper is trying to do is take that away from the states, which means nobody has the authority except the leadership in the legislature, state legislatures across the country, which means that there is no balance of power any place, that they do whatever they want, period.
No checks and balances.
Say again?
No checks and balances, no accountability.
They're gone. They're just taken and toss them out the window. Yes.
Yeah. And Suzanne, if I have a moment of privilege here, and this is tied. This is about Moore v. Harper, but there's another case that's being argued in October called Milligan v. Merrill, which concerns Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so in the context of redistricting. So the reason why I bring that up is if the court agrees with Moore, that state legislatures are the only ones that can draw maps and, do anything around federal redistricting or congressional redistricting, then we don't have a state court remedy, we don't have a federal remedy on partisan gerrymandering. But then if the court also agrees with the Milligan v. Merrill case in Alabama, and I can put something in chat that will explain the case, that may take away Section 2, our federal ability to hold any legislature accountable around redistricting for racial reasons. And so we could be hit with a double whammy here, that the North Carolina state legislature, for example, could make rules, could draw maps that are partisan gerrymanders and are intentionally discriminatory, slash are racially gerrymandered, and we have very few options to challenge those maps. And so I just wanted to note that that's also a part of the issue that we're facing right now in this country.
It looks like, we're just in danger of you losing any prerogative that, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. Scary.
Exactly.
I'd like to move back to Retrina with a question. Retrina, I've read that the ultimate goal of the supporters of the independent legislation theory is to change politics in America, from reproductive rights to gun rights to the environment. Actually, we've gotten a glimpse of these changes in some of the recent Supreme Court rulings, like the decimation of the Voting Rights Act, Citizens United, and overturning Roe. What can the average citizen voter do to prevent these changes? Are we just helpless?
Not at all. I just want to point out too, I think Mitchell had mentioned it earlier. I think North Carolina is one of the only states that have a no voting ID law because we all work together. We all work together to get that. So I just want to let you know like how important that is of fighting together and working together and talking about this. I know Mitchell put it in the chat, educating your community, making sure more than just yourself is getting to the polls to vote, coming up with a plan. If someone, I know I work with college students as well. Some of the college students are like, oh, I'm gonna vote back home. Oh, what's your plan to vote back home? When do you plan to go home? When is your early voting? Like I'm asking these questions because it's North Carolina, yes, but it's more than North Carolina. And we need to just make sure that we're making sure people are getting out to those polls and they are voting. We more than ever, I mean, we always need people to vote, but we need it in this midterm election. And unfortunately, a lot of attention, a lot of people are not getting out to vote for these midterms. So many people focus on the presidential election, but that's what we need. We need people talking about Moore v. Harper. We need people talking about the importance of voting. We need people, if you're going to be 18 before the November election, we need you to register and we need you to go vote. So no, we are not helpless. And I think, and our power is in the vote. So I do. Oh, and also, I'm sorry, I had another question, but yes, our power is in the chat. I have a question, but in the power of our vote and getting out and turning people out and educating our community on what's going on Moore v. Harper and all the other things that's going on. I think even with the Roe v. Wade case, I had more people asking me questions, and then it's like, yeah, oh, you don't like that? Okay, so are you voting? Just being really direct with that. So we're not hopeless. We just need to get people out and we need to educate.
That's good to know. You want to answer the question in the chat? It's can you explain the term of proportionality in the context of the maps?
Yes, just having more like competitiveness, splitting, compactness, and what that really looks like in terms of representing a community. And not really splitting it and pulling it in different ways where it's not even looking like what that community should be, what that district should be according to who lives there. And according to who should have the person they would prefer to represent them in their district. Definitely pulling into a direction that it doesn't even look like that community. So how did it get there? So I hope, did that explain it a little
Yes.
bit more? Okay. Mm-hmm.
All right. Next question, Mitchell. In today's Observer, spokesman for Senator Philberger, Pat Ryan, rebutted the premise in yesterday's Observer article entitled "Democracy in Danger." It labeled this warning, he labeled this warning semi-fascist hysteria. He went on to suggest that those who disagree should offer sound arguments as to why elected legislators in lieu of elected judges should not have absolute and unfettered control of North Carolina elections. Could you offer some examples of the sound arguments Mr. Ryan speaks of?
Yeah. So that makes me chuckle a little bit that he called that semi-fascist. It makes me chuckle. That is, there's a quote that absolute power corrupts absolutely. When we think of fascism, you think about absolute power. Like I think about Mussolini in Italy, and him having absolute power. But that's exactly why we can't have independent state legislature theory, because it would give the legislature absolute authority and absolute power that can go unchecked. So his argument is actually aimed at him, at the argument that his side is making. So I just wanted to start with that. Other argument about why this can't be the case is, again, we have a system of checks and balances, and so he's worried about elected officials. Those elected officials, are beholden to the people of North Carolina, the voters of North Carolina, not themselves. And as we've seen over the last 30 years in the redistricting context, and specifically over the last 10 to 12 years in other contexts around voter suppression, legislatures want to keep power themselves, and they want to keep people away from the polls. There is the North Carolina Supreme Court just ruled what's known as the usurper case, where a legislature that was racially gerrymandered made, passed enabling statutes for amendments that, they weren't even supposed to put on the ballot, essentially. And so for those who don't know what the usurper case is, the legislature was found to be racially gerrymandered, and they tried to further entrench their power via voter ID laws. That's what the North Carolina Supreme Court found a couple of weeks back. And so like that case exemplifies what happens with unchecked power. And guess who stood in the way of that unchecked power? The state Supreme Court. And so there's this battle over, elected judges versus elected officials. I think the court should be fair and be fair arbiters of the law. But I also think the legislators should not try to discriminate against people, and should not try to, whether it's a racial ethnic minority or a particular party, and that goes both ways. And, I don't think that, if the Democrats are in power, which they have been in the state of North Carolina, and they did the same thing. So this is not a anti-Republican, sentiment. This is a powerful politician argument that we need to make sure that our politicians who are elected by us have the ability to be checked. And so, so that the sound argument, again, is checks and balances. And the other sound argument is the literal text that they are relying upon does not prohibit the state courts from jumping into the fray to hold the legislature accountable. So those are two sound arguments. And the legislature cannot point to any statute or any particular language that says that state courts cannot, basically state courts stay away. They can't say that. Those are not the rules that we abide by. And so those are just two sound arguments that I would make in response to that.
Thank you. Those are great. There's a comment in the chat from Margaret Fritz. Wonderful presentations. Thank you so much. Our book club read this month. Our book club read this month is Unrigged by David Daly. So, Margaret, do you want to say more, or? Okay, then.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. I wasn't planning on, but the book covers a lot of stories of partisan gerrymandering and many of the topics that you all have covered. And by rigging, that's really what they are getting into in the book's title, that it's and that it's happened over the years. So I thought that the presenters might be familiar with that, which is why I brought it up. But thank you, Suzanne.
Oh, thank you, Margaret. Rotrina or Mitchell, do you have any comment on the book, or Harry?
I do. I know the book, and I know David Daly. He was at in 2017 and 2019. Common Cause had a 2-day conference over Durham at Duke University, and David spoke at both those. And he's done a lot of traveling across the country, and he wrote a book prior to that. Unrigged was the second part of that, kind of a sequel to the first one, and he shows progress. But it's an outstanding book, and he's an outstanding writer, and he's a really good panelist. I heard him speak a number of times on Zooms during the pandemic. But the book is really a good book, and gives you a really good background for what some places are doing, but at the end of the book, David says, I'm not confident that we're going to be able to work our way out of this thing. They've got too much control. So, we're in a real war here, and we got to keep on marching and fighting, and trying to move our trenches up 2 feet a day, I guess, to make the 2022 elections come out in favor of democracy. Because as Common Cause and Zahler say, democracy is absolutely on the ballot. It isn't just candidates this year, it is democracy. And at the end of the day, on November 9th, we may not have it anymore if we can't maintain that darn veto, the majority of the veto proof, or the Roy Cooper's veto, number one. And if we lose one of those two Supreme Court justice races, we're cooked. Everything else goes out the window.
I'd like to go to Retrina now. Your colleague, Allison Riggs, I'm assuming she's a colleague of both of yours, right? She's with Southern Coalition.
Yeah, she's with Southern Coalition.
Right. Yeah. So I guess she's a direct colleague with Mitchell, but she would,
Yes.
I'm sure, be working with you and aware of you, Retrina. Anyway.
Yes.
Allison has said if the Supreme Court rules in favor of Moore, it could create a nightmare scenario. Some examples offered are state legislators appointing their own electors, having one party rule entrenched in our state government, probably forever, our state constitution being rendered meaningless because this would just ignore our constitution, unfettered by checks and balances. The legislature could end early voting, same-day registration, and actually add a citizenship question on federal forms, like they tried to do with the census, and they weren't permitted to do it. This time it would be permitted. Would you please offer some more examples of the nightmare scenario and expand on some of the examples that I offered?
I don't know if Mitchell may. I don't know if that's. I just want to make sure I'm
I got you.
answering. Yes,
Yeah,
I think
I
I'm okay.
I got you. Tied with that, so one caveat that I want to add to your question, Suzanne, is that the nightmare scenario deals with the dual election system. So everything, and I agree that was a great list. I kind of want to copy down that list as well. So that list would be as to federal elections. The state court can still hold the legislature accountable for state, legislative issues or state races. And so that's the dual, electoral system that I was referring to earlier. And the example I'll add is voter ID. So if part of that, another part of the nightmare scenario is that the legislature could pass voter ID just for federal elections. They could try to pass it for both. The state Supreme Court has held that, state trial court has held that voter ID in its current enacted form is unconstitutional. We have an argument on that on October the 3rd in the North Carolina Supreme Court to see if the Supreme Court would uphold the ban on voter ID in its current form. And so that state court could do that for state elections, but then the legislature could say, you can't touch me on federal elections now. And so we're going to have voter ID for federal elections. And so when a voter goes to the poll, they're going to have to be asked, are you voting in the state election? Or are you voting in the federal election? And so we all know that's not going to happen. The poll workers are going to say, let me see your ID because there's a federal election on the ballot. Let me see your ID. Then we're going to have to step in and say, you can't ask for ID on state elections, and so there's going to be this dual system and a lot of voter confusion, which is going to end up in a lot of disenfranchisement because people are just not going to vote. They're going to say, this is too much effort. I'm not going to vote. And so this dual system is what's going to be chaotic. And I'll add this point, a point that we haven't talked about tonight, is that the state legislature continues to not fund, as much the state board of elections and county boards, and by virtue of that, county boards of election. They've prevented outside money from coming to county boards of election. If you all remember from the 2020 election, Mark Zuckerberg gave a lot of money to county boards of election because there was a shortfall. There's a shortfall for election administration, but there was a statute that was passed that said no outside money from going into county boards of election. But the legislature is making this argument that's going to create this dual system. Who's going to fund it? Is the legislature going to give more money to county boards of election to create this dual system? Because the argument they're making is going to be very expensive, and the legislatures are not paying that bill. We are. We as North Carolina voters are paying that and footing that bill for this dual system that could be created. So when Allison says nightmare scenario, your list there and then voter ID, and just again the overall dual system that's going to be created, because the state Supreme Court is going to create one set of rules for state elections, but then the legislature, because it can't be touched on federal elections, could create a completely different set of rules that's going to cause voter confusion. And so when the league or Common Cause or other folks go out and register people to vote, and tell them to go vote, there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to be asked about the rules of the game, essentially. And so the legislature is digging itself into, it's trying to be unaccountable, but it's honestly digging itself into a hole as well, because it's going to be very expensive. Like if they win, it's going to be very, very expensive.
And it's one of those be careful what you ask for deals.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have a question for Harry. Harry, can you explain why the majority party in North Carolina's legislature believes the idea of an independent legislature to be a reasonable political debate? If SCOTUS rules in their favor, we risk loss of checks and balances, giving absolute and unfettered control over our democracy. Could you tell us if you deem this a reasonable political debate? Why and why not? And I know what you're going to say.
It's a ridiculous statement. That comes from them, that it's a reasonable political debate. It's what was that one that it's like when they talked about it, the January 6th riots. They said, well, those people were tourists, the guys that were breaking into
the tourist legislature.
It's just political theater. It absolutely ridiculous, but they're spreading that around, saying that this is just reasonable political debate to take away the power of people's votes across the state of North Carolina forever. So it's not a reasonable political debate. It's a theft. It's an effort to steal democracy from the people of North Carolina forever and ever and ever. One thing I know we're running we're overrunning our time a little bit, but one of the things I want to say, and it's important to know, the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, SCSJ, which we've mentioned many times tonight, and Trina talked about it, and their partner in this tour that she's on, or the Common Cause is on, and who Mitchell works with, is an extraordinary organization. It was started, I think, in 2007 by Anita Earls, who's we were so fortunate in maybe her race to get on the Supreme Court in 2018, I think was it 2000? I think 2018 when Anita got on. Yep. It's maybe the most important election on that ballot because it held the majority, gave the Democrats majority in the Supreme Court. Anita started it back then, and they're an extraordinary organization. We are in outstanding hands. We have counsel, experienced, smart, absolutely committed counsel. And I don't know, Mitchell, if you're on that team or not, but feel good about the people who are representing democracy for us in that Moore versus Harper case. They're outstanding, and they're going to do the very best job they can. Allison would tell us not to light our hair on fire. And if I turn around, you could see the back of my head's all burnt off. But I'm really nervous. But we have outstanding, we got all-stars that are gonna go, walk on the field that day, and they're gonna do the very best that they can humanly do. And so you just have to pray hard that they come home with a win that day, or whenever the court decides how they're gonna view that.
I wonder why we have the distinction. North Carolina has the distinction of being ground zero for democracy. But I think you're right. That's what it kind of boils down to. Well, I feel kind of like Barbara Walters or something. We haven't had any questions from the audience. This is your chance. Does anybody have a question? I think maybe Kate asked one, or anybody else we've got about 15 minutes. So oh, Margaret, you got your hand up.
What would you like to see the league doing to help with this?
Good question.
I can chime in with some of it. I know definitely, like we said, definitely getting the word out. I know right now we're even doing work around even our county board of elections and making sure they're equitable and people are able to vote without any issues. That's just some of the work that we're doing here in Mecklenburg. Like right now, it's a shortage, they said on paper, for the updated versions of the voter registration forms. So we're literally getting together our coalition, including the League of Women Voters, and printing updated voter registration forms. I know I called 3 counties today who have not received updated voter registration forms. So definitely any help with county board of election monitoring and making sure we're able to get enough voter registration forms, updated versions, and not the old ones that were being used. So everything will be legal to get those out, as well as I know here in Charlotte, we're doing a lot of, we're doing some canvassing. It would be great. I'm here in Mecklenburg, so this is kind of what I do. We're going to be canvassing starting on October 9th, pretty much every weekend leading up to early voting. We're also having 2 early voting events to get folks out and get people involved and get them to the polls. I just want to say this is nonpartisan. I just want to say, though, the importance of it is that, I mean, even with Cheryl Beasley's race, I just want everyone to understand with our North Carolina State Supreme Court that she lost by 401 votes with over 5 million people voting. So I just, that, if just pushing people out to get to those polls, and I'm just using that because just how important it is. I think one of my colleagues, Tyler, he was in I forget what county, but he was working at the polls there, and literally they had to do a recount, and that particular candidate won by 1 vote. One vote.
1 vote.
After they did a recount, it was 1 vote. So that's how important it is. In any way you all can support and help with that effort and getting people to the polls here, please contact me. I would be happy to be a part, or you all could definitely be a part of anything that we have going on here. So I'll end it there.
And I'll add one more. Margaret, is after the elections, the elections on November 8th. So in addition to helping get out to vote, doing canvas monitoring on the backside. So for those who are not familiar with Canvas, that's where they count the votes. And Retrina just talked about, candidates winning by 1 vote, Justice Beasley, losing by 401 vote. We need Canvas volunteers. So Democracy North Carolina does leads that effort for Canvas volunteers. So basically in October, we'll be getting out notice of need for Canvas volunteers, because all you do is you go to the Canvas meeting for Mecklenburg County, and you watch the process. You watch the process and take notes about what's happening, and you note any inconsistencies that may be happening in the meeting. But that is something that's very, very powerful. You look at what happened with January 6th, and still in the election and all the downfall from that a lot of that was for in the canvas process, and so we need people to watch the process. It can be boring at times, I will admit. It can be boring at times, but it is necessary for those moments when things are going down.
Oh, that's great. The league has an observer corps with several of our action teams, so I'm not sure whether they do the canvassing thing, but it sounds like a perfect niche for them. Anybody else? Any other questions? It's just been wonderful having you all here tonight. You've been such a great panel. I know it's not always easy because you don't know what's coming at you and what the format's going to be, but I think y'all were just great. I'd like to just have everybody just make one final comment about the bottom line, what they want people to take from tonight. Just if they forget everything else, they go home with this thought. And start out with the ladies first again. We started out with Bertrina, and we'll continue that.
Okay, I don't know about one line, but definitely those resources, please use them, pass them out, talk to your friends about Morvie Harper and what's going on, and definitely get to those polls and support in any way prior to the election, and as Mitchell mentioned, after the election. So we'll be doing work around that too. So in Democracy North Carolina is definitely one of our partners that works with us. So please get involved and get your family and friends involved too.
Thank you. That was great. Mitchell?
Yep. And I guess my closing thoughts are don't lose hope. This has been happening for a long time, where there's a fight over voting rights in the state of North Carolina. We've heard it. No, North Carolina is ground zero. Harry talked about the trenches. We moved those trenches up 2 feet every day. I like that analogy a lot, Harry, because I believe that to be true. But the one thing that I want you all to remember is that every time the state of North Carolina has tried to take away voting rights or to suppress voting rights, courts have stepped in to stop that from happening, whether it be federal courts or state courts. And so state courts are powerful, but federal courts also have stepped in as well. And this case can really hinder state courts' ability to hold the legislature accountable. But I have, again, looking back at the track record of the court and the track record of North Carolina trying to take away rights, I don't think it's going to happen. I think the court is going to understand the value of checks and balances, and how if they agree with this statement, it's going to give unfettered power to the North Carolina legislature, the Florida legislature, the Kentucky legislature, etc., to do whatever they want to do without state courts being able to check them. And I just don't see that happening. So we can't lose hope.
But I read somewhere, I think I have it right, that there've been over the last 100 years, there've been so many attempts at this, and the Supreme Court has rejected it every time.
Yeah,
so
yeah. And
that history bears out.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I will say, is that the Supreme Court, let us down with Shelby County in 2013 and taking away preclearance under the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
They really let us down, because what that did is it opened the floodgates for the North Carolina legislature in particular to try to suppress the right to vote, whether it be cutting back early voting days with HB 589, the voter ID bill, eliminating 16, 17-year-old voter registration, out of precinct, ending out of precinct voting. And again, all this was in the monster voter suppression bill, HB 589. But what happened there? The federal court said that the legislature targeted Black voters with surgical precision. Like the federal court, stepped in and said, enough of this. This is discriminatory. We have to put an end to this. You fast forward to now with the partisan gerrymandering finding, the court has stepped in, the state court has stepped in and said, hey, this is unconstitutional, where like the voters are supposed to choose their elected officials, not the other way around, and so, that the history, I agree. Hopefully history bears out that, the Supreme Court will rule in the favor of voters and in favor of the people, because they've done it in the past.
Right. Yeah, we'll just keep our fingers crossed. Okay, Harry, the stage is yours for a final statement.
Okay. The tomorrow didn't happen yet. And so anything's possible. And we know, all of us on this call, we work really hard to doing the things we do. And what we do counts. Every time we go out, it counts. And it doesn't make any difference whether you're registering, whether you're working in a poll, whether you're giving $10 to somebody asks for it, whether you're talking about Moore versus Harper or talking about something else like that, when they're writing something to the Observer, it counts. And I'll just leave us with my part to quote the late, great Panther linebacker Sam Mills when he said, "Keep pounding." So let's keep on pounding. And that's the best we can do. And hopefully we come out on top of the pile through all this stuff and regain control of our own democracy.
Yes, yeah. Everybody's applauding. Yeah.
That's for Sam. Sam heard you do that.
Yeah. We're just fabulous. I'd like to go to some announcements and see if there are any from the people in attendance. We're having lunch with the league on October 12th, and it will be in person for what, 2 years, Margaret, since we've done in-person lunch with the league. Due to COVID. Anyway, we don't, the topic or speaker is to be established. And the league, our league, LWVCM, is sponsoring 2 political forums this year. I guess you'd say co-sponsoring. One in connection with the Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. We participated with them last election. And the other is North Met Community Candidates Racial Equity Forum. I am moderating one session for each group. If you want the dates and candidates, they're on our website. So, and I think our face page too. But does anybody else have any more announcements to make, or any other statements or comments? I know you put some great comments in the chat. But, well, it's almost witching hour, so I guess, we'll let everybody go and watch their favorite TV program or whatever they've got planned for the evening. Oh, Carol, thank you. Thank you all. This was so informative. We're glad you're here, Carol. So until next time, I guess we'll say adieu. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Program, really good program.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.